Greetings once again, my fans and fellow listeners. Welcome to another edition of Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling, Solo Moonlight Edition. Yes, folks, it is currently 3:55 a.m. in the morning as I'm recording this podcast for episode 43 of Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling. Welcome, put up a chair, have some snacks. We are here today because, well, a couple days ago I did episode 42, a talk about some of the recent incidents of Donner Partydom in the world of professional wrestling. And there was quite a lot of instances of that happening with the whole fiasco of the CEO Gaming X New Japan show from a couple days ago, which was covered in depth. Basically, the moral of that show, do a background check. And also, the National Sex Offender Registry is completely free to use, and it only takes 2 clicks and 2 minutes of your time to do a background check on a person. That's basically the moral of the story in that particular instance there. But this show is going to be very different. Last episode covered the negatives of the independent wrestling scene. This episode is going to showcase some of the positives of the independent wrestling scene. I'm not going to try to be overblown about this, but the strangest thing has happened in the past year or so. One of the better independent areas that I have currently witnessed is in my own backyard, Western New York, an area that had been economically and territory-wise had been down in the doldrums for about 25 years. Ever since Ito DePino tragically lost his life in a car accident in 1996, the Buffalo territory has gone through several different evolutions. Some of it positive, some of it negative. The negatives were that they lost a lot of their traditional wrestling because of every single wrestler that was in that area either retired, didn't properly train the people that they were replacing, or madness happened. Ironically, 1996 was also the year that the Buffalo Bills went downhill after the retirement of Jim Kelly as quarterback of the team. So many people could basically point to the year 1996 also was the year that the NWO risen, but it was also the same year that the Buffalo territory really declined. Yes, there was ECW cards in Buffalo. Yes, there was ECW cards in Erie. Yes, WCW occasionally went to Erie, Pennsylvania to do tours. But at the same time, the territory really had declined, and it had been declining since the 80s. And I know a lot of people will blame this, that, or the other thing, and they'll start pointing fingers at one another, but recently, the territory has seen a bit of an upswing. And it's because of the hard work of the wrestlers, staff, personnel, and everybody involved in the scene at this point, who wants to make something better for not just themselves, but for the people who come after them who come into this territory. Western New York is a very weird territory. It's a blue-collar, working-class territory where the people in this area work about 2 or 3 different jobs. And I'm starting off with that because the promotion I'm covering in this particular instance is once again Southern Tier Wrestling, my local regional promotion that's based in Jamestown, New York. Jamestown, New York had not had a solid regional promotion in decades. Probably not since at least the 80s. And I'm not even sure about that because I need to go look at my local historical archive to see when the last time a regional promotion was down in this area. And Southern Tier Wrestling sprung up a couple years ago in 2016. This is their 3rd season, as I've said before on past Wacky World Wrestlings. Yes, I've actually covered Southern Tier Wrestling on a couple of occasions, usually with a co-host, but this time I'm going solo on this one because, again, I'm recounting my experiences at the show, and today we are covering STW Fight Night Volume 1 from the Studio Metro / Spire Feeder / formerly known as the First Covenant Church, located in downtown Jamestown, New York, right across the street from the post office, in Jamestown, New York. And this card was held on June 16th, 2018. Yes, once again, I was delayed in reviewing this particular show because I had to deal with summer fever for about 2 weeks. So I was stuck in bed for 2 weeks with a summer fever. Didn't really do much, just to relax a little bit until I could get myself right to do a podcast about this particular show. I still need to edit and post the photos onto the Twitter pages. So for those of you wrestlers who I'm going to be likely tagging in the photos, they are coming. It's just taking a little bit because I had to deal with some lighting issues with my camera. Although a lot of the photos actually did turn out okay. So I'll check to see my files and see how things are on that end. But I have 8 matches to cover on this particular show. You can see I'm still getting used to the fact that I'm once again doing a solo podcast. The first time in 4 years I'd actually ever done one. So, yeah, Sovereignty Wrestling came out of the ashes unexpectedly in 2016 and started running shows. And as I documented before, I had difficulty getting to the early shows because of my financial situation as well as a lot of other factors. Like I had to replace my attic roof, so I missed Big Trouble at Little Celeron, the show that happened over at the what was it? It was at one of the venues over there, the American Legion Hall in Lakewood, New York. So I missed that show, but I finally got to an STW show at the Gold Rush show. That was the 2017 edition that was held at the Ice Arena, which is always an interesting venue to go to because it's freezing cold and you're stuck in the middle of an ice rink watching wrestling. It's a fun experience. It's a cool experience. This is a different experience altogether. This was a limited seating event at a former church that had been converted into a theater, which is why the subtitle of this episode is Night of the Fighting Phantom at the Theater. So, I will count my experiences, I guess. Once again, we have 8 matches to cover, 1 impromptu match, and 7 matches that were scheduled on the card. So, to begin with, I'll recount my experiences. I got my tickets early this time around because of the limited seating thing that we had to deal with. Now, also, the other thing is that this venue is only a couple blocks away from my house. I live close to downtown, so I could easily walk down here. So it was not like any kind of issue where usually I'd have to drive somewhere to get to a show. I got the tickets early, as said, and made sure to get them early as I could. General admission tickets once again. And when 5:30 p.m. hit, we walked down to the venue and we took our seats. And the venue is this underground basement of a church. There are all sorts of old church pews and metal seats strewn around the venue. The ceiling was a bit on the small side, so the wrestlers really couldn't do any major high spots on the ropes. That didn't stop them from trying, though. Bless their hearts. But they also they didn't want to get into the hit their head in the air conditioning unit or anything like that. So this was a card that was the second day for many of these wrestlers, as many of them had done a tour beforehand and the night before. Either I think it was in Brockport, New York, for International Wrestling Federation, I believe, IWF, and on Brockport, which is nearby Buffalo. And this is the card that was really well built, I felt, and it had a lot of very interesting different matches on it. So me and my mom, and as I've said before, I take my mother to wrestling shows. We have a really fun time going to wrestling shows because to her, even though she's not a really big fan of wrestling, she is a former community theater organizer. So she understands it as theater. And it's really, really fun theater to go to. And as an added bonus, well, I might have scarred the eyes of the patrons, the wrestlers, and the staff when I decided to show up to the event because, after all, this is a former church. So I decided to dress up, and you'll find on my Twitter page that my outfit. I decided to show up to the venue with an aqua green 1970s blazer on with a wrestling t shirt underneath. and black khaki pants and brown shoes, along with a trucker hat, along with a camo trucker hat. You can see the picture on my Twitter page at Fizzpatrick14. And yeah, it was quite blinding. I was the person who wore a blazer at the show, and I'm glad I did because it was nice and comfortable. Because while the venue was slightly hot because of the air conditioning, the positive was the factor that I brought a blazer in there in the first place because it provided some extra padding for my back because I was sitting in a church pew. Yeah, the old church pews were being used as seating for this venue. And it had all these posters and signs and artwork and Studio Metro Underground Theater. There's like 10 theater companies leasing these spaces in this church. Now, the primary vendor is the Spire Theater. So another great thing is that STW had signage up in front of the parking lot so that you can tell where exactly you could go to come into the venue. And it was very, very good. We've actually been yelling at them to get signs up. And also, I should mention here before we begin our first match is that I'm not affiliated with Southern Tier Wrestling. I don't work with Southern Tier Wrestling. All I do is I attend the shows and yep. Mhm. And basically review the shows and look at them and look at the roster and just and these shows are always so fun to do for me because they are extraordinarily exciting because I get to cover my local indies. And as I said, my local indies are weird and weird in a good way. A lot of the normal stuff that you hear about with the independent scene just doesn't happen here. Everybody realizes that this territory nearly died like 15 years ago, so it's a thing where they realize that they all need to work together in order to make this territory work. And they're doing their hardest with the training, the personnel, and the promotions are all working their hardest to try and make this territory viable again for not just regional wrestlers, but for everybody to come down here to Western New York to work in. And like I said, not affiliated with STW personally. I am friends with many of the wrestlers and people who work at STW, but at the same time, I have to do a review of this show because I want to do this as fairly as I can. And we begin with our first match, which has become an interstate feud. Our first two combatants are the Moonlights son, Mike Skyros, who I've covered on before on this podcast. He is a technical high flyer wrestler with some variety of power moves. He knows how to deadlift people. His opponent, in his attempt to deadlift, is one of his greatest rivals at this point, and a guy that we've talked about glowingly on the show before, Terrell Kenneth. Terrell Kenneth brought his ye old Shakespearean flair to this basement. That's also fun fact for those of you who don't know, and it's something I had to actually mention at some point. Both my mother and me went, "Hang on a minute, we did research of this." Yeah, both me and my mom worked. We did some historical society work for the New York State Historical Society, and what we were doing was chronicling the Underground Railroad in the city of Jamestown. And we found out that a number of the churches in the area, including the venue that was being used at the event, were former Underground Railroad safe houses. I have an Underground Railroad safe house in my dining room, by the way, that we discovered in 2000. We've lived on this property since July of 1999. We're nearing 20 years. Um, so it's something that is greatly fascinating to me is the Underground Railroad and just how influential my city actually was in the Underground Railroad because a large number of abolitionists lived in Jamestown and helped slaves get on the road to Canada for freedom. And I think that that's just really cool. that several wrestlers got to experience, this venue. If you felt a vibe and if you felt something special about this venue, there's your reason. And there's something spiritual about this place, like a lot of the old buildings in Jamestown. Anyway, Terrell Kenneth, he channeled that spiritual energy into theatrical flair, and his mission was pure and simple. He wanted to destroy Mike Skyros again. You see, Mike Skyros was the IWF Heavyweight Champion. I say was until Terrell Kenneth turned him into paste. Now, the IWF Heavyweight Championship was not on the line here because this was just the opening match, and of course, Sovereignty Wrestling, regional wrestling rules and whatnot about championship belts. So, this was a simple grudge match between two lifelong competitors who faced against each other before. Skyros' mission was simple. He needed to deliver his finisher on Terrell Kenneth. His finisher is him lifting his opponent up and then slamming them. Terrell Kenneth is not small. And this is a guy that he tried. The first time he attempted to do it, it didn't work out for him. And the sound of a popping sound actually was heard as the two of us went, "Oh, did he just pop out his back?" And the rest of the people in the arena were thinking the same thing. We're like, did he just pop out his back doing that? So Skyros continues on. The match psychology was incredibly well done. These two have wrestled against each other constantly, and they know each other's strengths and weaknesses. Terrell Kenneth is a force of destruction who's able to make any person he goes up against look really, really good. Skyros typically plays a heel in other territories, but as I've talked about before with STW, this is a territory that primarily has heel wrestlers be babyface wrestlers. Bill Collier, Vince Fowler, Mike Skyros, the Homewreckers. A large number of people who would normally be babyfaces are heels, and a large number of people who would normally be heels are in fact babyfaces. Because again, this is a working class area. So people who are working class heroes usually get better face reactions than, say, somebody who would get just a typical face reaction in an inner city, for example. And this match was just so fun. Back and forth, two wrestlers fighting against one another to see who could be victorious. Skyros finally manages to get his finisher. He lifts Terrell up, and he literally did this. He lifts Terrell up, hits his finisher on him, and pins him for the 1-2-3 after a really exciting opening match. And as you might have noticed on my Twitter page, you may have seen that I have 2 new wrestling shirts on my list. And the first one was actually Skyros' shirt. I felt since the guy nearly popped his back out, I figured, there's a guy to deserve that, because Kyros had been on my list for a while, and I have a t-shirt rotational list for wrestlers, and all you have to do is pass the character test and have a merchandise design that is appealing to me. I don't really do any designs that are particularly sexually explicit or words or phrases. I typically tend to avoid white t-shirts because I have rusty water in this city has a rusty water problem, so shirts get rusted on in the wash. But I will make exceptions. I made an exception for a Bill Collier shirt last time, and that one was white and black. So yeah, that's my intermission story at that point. But before we get to the intermission, we have another match to cover. We have the Stig and Azumi of Southern Tier Wrestling and the rest of Western New York to talk about next. Yes, the Curtises, or in this case, Big Jack Stewart, a transplant from Washington State, and Kate Carney, who's originally from Oregon, are now here in Western New York. And they've made quite an impression so far on Southern Tier Wrestling. Both of them were in the Gold Rush Rumble at the April show, which was the last show I covered on Fizzy Wacky World of Wrestling for the STW related reviews. They made quite an impression on me. Jack Stewart with his size and destruction, and Kate Carney having the meanest having the meanest punches I've ever seen anybody deliver. Who is their poor, unfortunate victim in this particular tag match? Oh, Urza Ellswood. Him. The guy who replaced his partner, Topher Sinclair, with a mattress. The guy who seems to be considerably more sensible than his manager. A man who's really developed incredibly good acting skills as of late. This is a guy who has embraced the evil vegan hippie archetype and has embraced it into such a degree that he is universally hated by the majority of the crowd. And Topher Sinclair, deciding smartly that he did not want to be sacrificed to the mattress gods this time, well, he decided that he was going to introduce Urza's partner. Except his partner just basically destroyed any and all credibility that they had with the vegan hipster cafes and their friends. Well, because it was the Buffalo bad boy Brian Jennings who was their partner. Now, Brian Jennings did really well in this match, showcasing a template that's not often seen with face, heel, and face matches. Also, I should also note one other thing that's very important about the delicacy of this match. This is an intergender match. Kate is wrestling in this match. Now, a lot of times, intergender matches can be done either very poorly or very well. Thankfully for this match, this was in the latter category, because Kate was treated equally as everybody else. There was no sort of weird, bizarro comedy spots. There was no weird over-sexualization. There was no anything that's done by... there were no weird spots. It was just a traditional wrestling match with 4 competitors, and Urza Ellswood got turned into tofu by Kate. Kate Carney just did really well in this match, showcasing just she has incredible striking skills. Her strikes are vicious, and her Carniacs, as I've begun to nickname them, are overjoyed by their idol absolutely destroying this evil vegan hippie. The Carniacs in question, I believe, are Girl Scouts who love blood, violence, and the destruction of all who oppose them and their finment reigns, which also includes vegans. So they were quite happy as Kate was basically turning Urza into tofu. Brian Jennings also came into the match and was far more respectful. He treated it as a competition, as 4 equal competitors, 2 equal competitors. Jack Stewart provided the big guy bowling over people like a bowling ball hitting a stack of 10 pins. There was a lot of excitable babyface fire in this match, and it was incredibly enjoyable to see the interactions between Ellswood, Jennings, Carney, and Stewart, along with, of course, the manager that constantly gets Urza into a lot of trouble, Topher Sinclair, who did himself no favors by trying to anger the audience again with his Brooklyn charm. Spoiler, he doesn't have any charm. All it is hatred and vegan protein shakes. So yes, after Ellswood and Jennings lost the match in the first, and this is also a first round match in the Manny Escobar Memorial Tag Team Tournament. A wrestler named Manny Escobar passed away a couple months ago. I believe it was in March. And there was a tag team tournament dedicated in his memory that started at the Gold Rush show, for those of you who may recall. And this was another first round matchup. So we're going to be seeing, I believe, second round matchups at the next show, which is July 18th at the Chautauqua County Fair. Well, that should be pretty interesting. The second annual edition of Midway Mayhem, the one show I actually didn't go to last year. It's going to be really interesting. So anyway, Ellswood gets angry at Jennings, even though he lost and was pinned by Kate. And her Carniacs cheered, wishing for his blood. And Ellswood wanted to Tauber gets him into a match with Brian Jennings. Brian Jennings hits a cutter, stuns the man, and proceeds to pin him for the 1-2-3 in about 5 seconds. Rather really enjoyable match that was a payoff to the entirety of the angle that started when Topher made his announcement. It was really enjoyable how it was done. And it's very difficult to do intergender matches right, but this intergender match was done correctly, which really pleased my mom and really pleased myself because we're both massive advocates against, as you might have heard on the last show, we're both massive advocates against sex offenders and domestic violence. That's our two big things, And I know that some people have issues with intergender matches because it does sometimes end up becoming a match where the guy beats up on the girl too much and it becomes really uncomfortable. But there was none of that here. Everybody was really respectful. Everybody understood that this area has a pretty high domestic violence rate in comparison with a lot of other counties. So they booked this as best they could, and it ended up being a beautiful match. So hats off to all 4 of you, or 5 of you, for making this match as enjoyable as it was. And the impromptu match was really fun as well. Now, one of my favorite things about the show, as there are many, is talking about debuting wrestlers. The night before, a guy named Megabyte Ronnie made his debut and faced off against Brandon Thurston, who I'll talk about a little later in the broadcast. He had his second match against the real mother trucker, Dewey Murray. Now, Megabyte Ronnie has a very interesting history. He's a former U.S. Army veteran. He is also a competitive eater, and oh, by the way, kind of current and relevant, the guy is actually going to be competing at the Nathan's hot dog eating contest in New York City. Yes, really, he's ranked 32nd in competitive eating and won a qualifier in Nashville, Tennessee. And he's going to be competing at the Nathan's hot dog eating contest. It's on ESPN too. I believe it's going to be at 4:30 p.m. I should probably take a look and see when the time is because that's really awesome. It's not the first time somebody from Buffalo has competed, but this is a guy who's representing Buffalo, New York, who's originally from North Carolina. So anyway, Megabyte Ronnie is facing against Dewey. He looks like a combination of a North Carolina grappler and Timothy Thatcher, which no doubt is going to please my friend Reverend Claire Elizabeth, who is the current president of the Timothy Thatcher fan club. And nobody's going to take that position away from her because they're all going to be mauled to death by an army of cats. Trust me on that one. So anyway, Megabyte Ronnie has to face against the finely tuned trucker physique of Dewey Murray. And it turns out to be a lot more difficult than he expected it to. Now, Ronnie comes into this match as a heel. And surly, angry, I don't like anybody down here, which in fairness, you're in Jamestown, buddy. So you're already doing good things there, man. So he comes into this match as a heel. He looks like a combination of a North Carolinian grappler and Timothy Thatcher. He has a look. He has the capabilities of destruction, and he's really, really got solid, good grappling fundamentals. Gee, it's almost as if he was professionally trained. Oh wait, he was by Grapplers Anonymous. I've honestly constantly been impressed by what Grapplers Anonymous has been able to do over the last year and a half or so. The amount of improvement in the newer wrestlers, as well as the current guys that are here in the region, has just been simply outstanding to watch. 5 shows in, and I've already got comparison notes in my head as to see who's improved. And there's been little to no regression out of anybody here. It's all just been steady, consistent improvement. This is my first time seeing Megabyte Ronnie, and he already made an impression on me as a solid heel. He yarks at the crowd and says, "Is this your idol?" referring to the man with the finely tuned trucker physique. Dewey Murray is a great babyface. Previously, Murray, as you might have seen, has been a heel in the past. Dewey changes it up and beats a babyface in this particular instance. And it was really fun to see him try to overcome the muscular obstacle that was a competitive eater. Megabyte, you know, showcased a lot of fire and intensity in his match. Showcased that he is a destructive heel in waiting. And he's got the technical grappling skills too. That's just so cool to see, just really good technical grappling. Basic holds applied in such a degree that it works in this territory because it is a traditional wrestling territory to an extent. Although if it was a traditional wrestling territory, I don't think they would be even as successful because traditional basically means, in my mind, the idea that, you just put up signs and posters. This territory has a few modern elements as well. They have a very good online presence, mainly on Facebook, but also some presence on Twitter. Mainly because of the fact I keep posting photos on my thing, but also the wrestlers are starting to do that as well. The photos in this particular instance, by the way, if you want to see professional quality photos of these matches, you can just go to TMK Pro Wrestling Photography, which has a Facebook page. You'll sometimes see their photos posted by the wrestlers. And I actually know the photographer, his name's Tim, was one of the first guys in the local scene I actually met back in 2014. When I worked as a cashier at Kmart, he would come in buying batteries for his camera. So if anyone ever wanted to know just how he was able to get out of Kmart's and on time and get to a wrestling venue on time, well, there's your answer, because I actually got him for the checkout lines and said, "Hey, I got my register open. You want to go through? I'll get you through." And it was funny how it happened was I saw he was wearing a Pro Wrestling Noah t-shirt, and I struck up a conversation because I know Pro Wrestling Noah. It's like, "Hey, you got a Noah t-shirt?" It's like, and his eyes open up like, "Oh man, somebody actually knows what this promotion is." And it was cool to see him at the show. He had missed the last couple ones because his family is currently doing they're doing amateur wrestling. They're doing professional amateur wrestling. And it's so cool to see them do that. And they're going across country around the tour to the various different places where amateur wrestling tournaments are being held, and they're doing that. So he was able to show up at this show because there was a break in his schedule, and he provided some really nice photography photos for those who want to see them. Of course, I will also be posting my own photos that I took at the event. But anyway, this is match number 4 technically, but this was a really solid match. Next up is the Southern Tier Wrestling Tag Team Champions in a match in the first round of the Manny Escobar Memorial Tag Team Tournament. They are the Homewreckers, Anthony Gaines and Jet Rebel. Anthony Gaines, who has recently made himself famous by unfortunately hitting the gravitational field of a fellow cruiserweight wrestler named Ace Romero. And went flying into the 6th row and knocked down a cameraman. But before he was inevitably hit by the forces of gravity, Anthony Gaines had a title to defend, and also progressing through the tournament. For you see, he decides to put his titles on the line, because they are fighting champions, and they're also celebrating the fact that they've been champions and in Southern Tier Wrestling for nearly a year. So who are their opponents? Ryan Cassidy! Ah, yes, the Canadian who thinks he's a Pokemon. And DT, too, a guy who showed up at the Rumble as his partner. And he's wearing sunglasses. Indoors. Yep, they're the bad guys. Along with their manager, Jonathan Ashe, and their clipboard. The old one ended up going into the wood chipper after betraying them because the clipboard did not help them beat Tony Atlas. In fact, it hit Cassidy over the head in a stunning but sudden but inevitable betrayal by a clipboard. Yep. So, Ryan Cassidy wants tag team gold. DT wants tag team gold and to wear his sunglasses indoors. The Homewreckers have a ball full of energy, and they want to showcase that they are the greatest tag team champions in Southern Tier Wrestling. Normally, hubris would doom that sort of thing, but in this case, this match was incredibly solid. Jet Rebel was the babyface in peril throughout this entirety of the match. The heel team proceeded to decide to remove him from the equation by beating the literal tar out of him every single time. Gaines was hopping up and down on the corner, waiting to tag in like a ball of fire. If only he ever knew that that ball of fire was about to be rebounded by the force of a gravitational cruiserweight. But before that happened, Gaines had to help out his partner Rebel on several occasions. Of course, the heelish antics of the managerial duo of Ashy, the newly replaced Clipboard, who is Canadian, and of course DT and Cassidy putting some very smart psychological tag team action into this match. The pace was slow, but not that slow, because once the hot tag hit, Anthony Gaines runs in like a speedy blonde hedgehog and proceeds to run roughshod over his opponents. The Homewreckers proceed to also do several nice combination tag team maneuvers in the tiny small venue, and they somehow do not hit their heads on the air conditioning ducts that were on the top of the venue, because the roof ceiling was rather small for this, as I said. This was a really solid, really fun match that was enjoyable to see live. And to see a guy like Anthony Gaines now get some virtual publicity in the form of being launched into suborbit by Ace Romero is kind of fun to see. Is really fun to see as well, because this is a guy I've seen constantly on Sovereignty Wrestling cards. The Homewreckers have always been enjoyable, if a little reckless, but that's their style. They're your reckless garage punk tag team. And garage punk is always wild and unpredictable. So that was a very fun match. And I should talk about intermission for a second. Intermission is often the time when I come to stretch out my legs a little bit and to relax a little bit, because unlike a lot of other people that go to wrestling shows, I go to pro wrestling shows to relax. It's an enjoyable experience for me, and it's anything that has any pressure to it. I do have mild crowd anxiety issues, but if I get some space and just relax a little bit, I'm good to go. So my first stop was to Mike Kyros' t-shirt stand, and here's another achievement on the list of things that I've always wanted to do. Buy wrestling merch ringside. See, they didn't have any space for tables for merchandise, so the wrestlers had to put their wares on the ring to sell them. And the first person on my list was Mike Kyros, so there was that one scored. So I got a Mike Kyros t-shirt, and at the end of the show, I picked up another t-shirt, which I'll talk about a little later. I went out. There was a nice little outside area that I could breathe in and out, because the venue is a little stuffy, a little tight, but not terribly so. It seats about 200 people. And the church pews were extremely comfortable, especially since I was wearing a jacket. So after all of that happened, and I believe that the tag team championship match, I'm not sure if that was the intermission match, or I think it was the intermission match, if I think about it correctly. So after that, we were treated to the first of basically of what I call a triple main event, because each of these matches had a different story and a different vibe to them as far as they were concerned. And the first match was my match of the night. Sorry to the other two matches, but there's nothing quite like what I experienced in this particular match. For those of you who really like technical grappling, and if you see the names Brandon Thurston and Vince Valor on a card, you are in for something very special. Because once again, we have to talk about Brandon Thurston, the patron saint of professional wrestling. Now, as I've said before on past episodes of Wacky World of Wrestling, there are two sides of Brandon Thurston. There's Brandon Thurston, the wrestling new media guy, the guy who does articles for a dozen or so different websites, Fightful, Wrestling Incorporated. He's been everywhere. And he also is a trainer. He trains people over at Grapplers Anonymous Pro Wrestling, along with several other people. Mikey Every Night, Kaiju Chris West, Braxton Sutter, Pepper Parks. They all do a phenomenal job of teaching the fundamentals as well as bringing in advanced psychology and how to be a complete professional wrestler. And the results speak for themselves. Everybody in the territory has improved massively since I started watching them last year. And like I said beforehand, it's always so cool to see a wrestler develop and find ways to fix the holes in their game or to make their weaknesses their strengths or to improve upon their strengths even further. And Brandon Thurston cut an amazing promo to start things off where he's like saying, oh, no, they needed Brandon Thurston. They wanted Brandon Thurston, the classic promo. And it causes Vince Valor to fall asleep, which was a great touch. So you have these two wrestlers, and as I talk about, continuing on with Thurston, there are two sides to Brandon Thurston. There's Brandon Thurston, the wrestling analytics guy, the economics guy, the guy that will look up any form of economic information, who does graphs on Microsoft Excel, one of the hardest programs I've ever had to use. Flow charts, all sorts of things, economic graphs, statistics, percentages. He's incredibly smart. He's one of the smartest people in the territory as far as that's concerned. Which makes it so funny because his character as a wrestler, Brandon Thurston, the media person, really nice guy. Brandon Thurston, the wrestler, total psycho. And I've said that before, but it really is. He is the leader of the patron saints of professional wrestling. And, well, while the Tonawanda chapter has had its issues, apparently they've broken up there, the Erie and Jamestown chapters of the patron saints of professional wrestling are A-okay. Because, again, when you're planning and plotting and doing evil, and you're in an area that, put aside all of your grudges and differences in one territory, there's a territory that needs to be conquered, and, well, we might as well need manpower for that. So, Terrell Kenneth is a ginormous monster who will destroy anything. Brandon Thurston is scarier than Terrell Kenneth is, to an extent. Terrell Kenneth's a pure monster who will destroy everything. Brandon Thurston is a scientific technical wrestler who will rip you limb from limb and do all sorts of varieties of technical holds. And that arm bar that he does is his finisher. It's, he does that arm breaker move on you, you're done. And the way that every match that Thurston does tells a story. It's a technical story. And the story of this match was, how is Vince Valor going to be able to keep up with Brandon Thurston? Answer? He could keep up with him. And he did really, really, really well. This was the Grappling special. They really lived up to the name of Grapplers in this particular case when it comes to the name of Grapplers Anonymous. Because the first 5 minutes of this match was pure grappling, reversals, some power moves sprinkled in to make things interesting. Because this was a contest of Vince Valor's invincibility and never say die attitude alongside his power moves, and Brandon Thurston's technical tenacity and penchant for evil doings. This was my favorite match on the card. It employed a lot of elements of all the technical holds. I was watching this and my mother said to me in the corner, she's like, Brandon is like Bruce Lee. He's fast. He's incredibly fast. He's doing all these holds and reversals with ease. Like it's a Sunday out in the park. It's a Sunday jog out in the park. And that's how this match was. It's a really good match when you know that the two individuals put their hearts and souls into this, and they did just that. There were power bombs, there were reversals, there were the Toshiaki Kadiwara kicks. He's a massive fan of Toshiaki Kadiwara, and he incorporated his kicks in his style. And it's just so fun to see a guy be able to embrace, his fandom for All Japan and for Japanese wrestling in general is always plain to see. That's how he got interested into wrestling, was through Japanese wrestling. Much like how I actually got interested in wrestling from two ways, both because my remote died on a random episode of TNA Impact, and from all the Japanese wrestling I would watch that was available on YouTube in like the 2010s and still is. So when you look at this match, it was so enjoyable to watch. It was a main event for me, but there were two other good to great main events still to come. And Vince Fowler, really, really solid technical wrestler. Not just solid, but really good. He's not just a power wrestler. He's deceptive because he looks like a power wrestler. He does power moves. He can do technical grappling well as too. He's not just a one-dimensional power wrestler. He can do a lot more than that. And it's always great to have those extra tools in your arsenal when you're trying to lay out and construct a match. Technical grappling can really be a great asset, and it's something that I've always really encouraged and something I've always really been interested in because I care about the health and safety of workers. I've talked about that before on the show, and technical grappling is a great way to help ease issues with the health and safety of wrestlers. If you bring technical grappling back and introduce it back into an audience and showcase to them that this works, that this can make a difference in a wrestler's health, then you don't need to do 50,000 flips and spy spots to get a crowd reaction. You can just rely on the old school technical grappling. And I don't even consider it old school. I just consider it as is. It's technical grappling. Holds, moves, sequences. And this match had it all. And it was beautiful art in motion. There was sequences in this match that just flew right by. I was like, they did that. They actually did that. And it was so cool to see. Made even more special at the end of the show, but we'll get to that a little later. Next up in the match is a complete opposite. Ring announcer comes in. They had to replace a chair because it had accidentally broken during the, I believe it was during the Megabyte Ronnie Dewey Murray match that we were using as a step stool. So they found a step stool, not an actual chair. And the ring announcer comes in and announces that this is an unsanctioned match unapproved by Sentell Wrestling. So that was kind of important to announce and kind of important to say because this was the one match on this card that had some difficulties. Caesar versus Frankie Fevers in an unsanctioned match. Now, I've talked about the Divine Alliance's feud with Frankie Fevers beforehand. Frankie Fevers was betrayed by them, the members being John Kennedy, Johnny Puma, and the Caesar. And these three have been causing havoc for the last several months and playing their losing streak on Fevers. And Fevers did not react well to them betraying him. He attempted to take a food court sign to bash Caesar's head in last time, and to save Gavin Glass. This time, well, as Caesar is making his entrance, Fevers runs in and proceeds to wallop him in the back with a chair, setting the tone of this match. For those of you who are not into hardcore matches, this one was slightly uncomfortable to watch. Both of us were kind of slightly uncomfortable by it because while I have seen hardcore no DQ matches beforehand, the match itself was relatively solid, extremely well structured. The hardcore spots did their well, and I had no issues with a large majority of those spots. The fire extinguisher spot was creative, and it's the first time I've ever seen a fire extinguisher being used in a ring in a match before. And the chair spots were well done and safe. No shots to the head. Everybody was as safe as they could be. The one minor problem is that Caesar introduced his belt into the match. Yeah, that's where things get a little awkward. Remember that whole Underground Railroad safe house thing? Yeah, so a clown wrestler in Joker makeup is facing against an African American wrestler with a belt. Thankfully, the silent reaction and the horror from the crowd and the audience alerted the wrestlers that this might not be a good spot to continue using. So after a minute, they very quickly discarded that spot and went to the next spot, and they pulled an audible because they saw somebody from the back looking over at them saying and going, guys, you might want to do something different here. And if any of them got a gut feeling about if that was something. Now, nobody knew that this was an Underground Railroad site. Nobody knew that because my city is so bad at talking about historical significant sites. So basically, it's something that is teachable and is something for future note. If you're gonna do a Donkey Q match, make sure you don't do any belt spots. If you are doing any other kind of spots, that's fine. Chair spots, fine, as long as you're safe with the head. Fire extinguisher spots, that's fine. A white rocker belt being used, that's not so fine, especially since there are kids in the audience, after all. This is a family event. As I've talked about in the past, you want to make these events safe for families. You can do your hardcore matches, you just got to make sure to do the following. Don't do anything with blood, because New York State will literally eat you alive if there's anything involving blood. Chair shots to the head, obviously, and belts. That's about it. And it's a minor criticism of a match that was solid. It continued the feud because Frankie defeated Caesar. The right outcome happened. The right winner happened. I would have preferred if Frankie was more of a Rocky Balboa and proceeded not to get mauled by Puma and Kennedy. And Kennedy attempted to use him as a footstool, which was also awkward. It was uncomfortable for a lot of people in the audience, but there was a reason for why it was uncomfortable, to showcase that the Divine Alliance had truly gone off the deep end, to showcase how diabolically evil that they had become. Johnny Puma becoming this corrupting influence that not even John Kennedy seemed to realize that was happening to him. And John Kennedy is always as diabolical as always. Diabolical, seedy, sleazy 1970s style heel manager who has incorporated a Dolph Ziggler look for this show, which kind of was sort of an ironic contrast. I kind of wore a look similar to Kennedy's look at the show, and it kind of basically showcased sort of a yin and a yang. Kennedy is the dark side, and whereas I don't mean to brag, was the light side. I was the light side on the show. And people actually picked up on that, and they looked at me, and they looked over, and they're like, okay, he's wearing a suit jacket. I was wearing it because it was comfortable and also because it's formal at a church. I didn't even realize that he was going to be doing sort of a Dolph Ziggler look of a 1980s rocker. I think he pulled it off a bit better than Ziggy did, though, for my personal opinion. He pulled it off way better. The sleazy 80s rocker. So Caesar got defeated. He's the first obstacle being destroyed by Fevers. Fevers will likely be trying to destroy Puma and Kennedy at the Chautauqua County Fair show. So that was a solid match, unsanctioned match. Again, I'm glad they warned us ahead of time that this was an unsanctioned match and that things could get uncomfortable in this match. I'm glad that they took the preparation ahead of time to note that. Nobody knew that this was an Underground Railroad site, so there was nothing here that was intentional. It was just a pure accident. It was just a pure accident, and trust me, nothing like that's going to happen at this venue again. Seriously, just trust me on this one. There are some ways you can be a really positive influence, and I did let people know that, hey, guys, this is an Underground Railroad venue. Might want to, the spot was uncomfortable, but just to let you know ahead of time so that you do a show next time, just have that in your notes that's there. So anyway, after an unsanctioned match that was really solid, well executed, we had the Southern Tier Wrestling Heavyweight Champion, The Dawn, Rob Sweet, with his furnace of hatred himself, Super Beast, accompanying him. And the sound of Super Beast's voice once again hitting a microphone. inciting a crowd into a near riot once again. Faced off against the local hero, James Sentell. James Sentell returned at the Gold Rush show to compete in the Gold Rush Rumble. He almost won the Rumble, except Rob Sweet cheated James Sentell out of a Rumble win. James Sentell was gifted an opportunity at the Southern Tier Wrestling Heavyweight Championship in response. Sentell and Sweet had a very solid, enjoyable match that had a lot of the hallmarks of a prototypical heel champion run. Sure, there was interference, but it was understandable interference. Super Beast wanted to make sure that his client held on to that. I don't know how much gold is in that belt. Like, is it? I don't think it's 10 pounds of gold, but I think it's around 7. But the heavyweight championship belt of the region, and Rob Sweet, as diabolical as ever, took every shortcut in the book to try and retain his title. To the point where his manager, Super Beast, in all of his infinite wisdom, decided it would be a good idea to take the timekeeper's bell and proceed to ring the bell. Well, he's gonna be dealing with one extraordinarily angry timekeeper at the end of this show. So he rings the bell, and the referee looks over and he says, "Whoa, no, you're not the person that's the timekeeper." And Sweet proceeds to pull a Shinsuke Nakamura special and hit Sentell on the gonads when the ref's back is turned. Sentell fights through the pain, proceeds to try and counteract Sweet, but it is unfortunately too much. Sweet fits his finisher on Sentell to retain the Southern Tier Wrestling Heavyweight Championship in an underhanded, really, really well done story-based match. Sentell is really getting back into shape. He's getting back into wrestling shape. And you have Sweet, who's there, who's always been a good hand. Rob Sweet is a good hand to have. He has a lot of good character work that he brings into matches. It's always enjoyable to see him wrestle because you know you're going to get an underhanded heel champion or a likable babyface, depending on which area Rob Sweet's going to be competing in. I also love the Don gimmick. The Don Rob Sweet. That's just so... And he has the Godfather theme too. So it's like the complete package as far as hateable character goes. And then you add on the Furnace of Hatred himself, Super Beast, who can incite a riot in a building with just one promo. And usually does. But Sentell had a fire promo as well at the end of the show, claiming that he was going to find 2 other people to join him to defeat the family. So we got ourselves potentially a 6-man tag team match at the Chautauqua County Fair show here. It's pretty soon. So that's going to be really interesting to see. So yeah, the next show is the Chautauqua County Fair show on July 18th. And you can also see Megabyte Ronnie competing in the hot dog eating contest at Nathan's on the 4th of July on ESPN2. I believe the start time is 4:30 or 2:30. I'm not sure which. I'll have to double check. Anyway, and to close out our show, one more story. So after the show was over, they begin to start to disassemble the ring. Usually we let a lot of people get out of the ring first, and when we say hi to some of the wrestlers. And, well, this is kind of something special. I've had this guy on my t-shirt buy list for a while. I almost bought a shirt from him in February at the Fast Times at Faulkner High show, but I didn't have the cash on me because my mother was sick with the flu. She was actually going to donate me $20 to buy his shirt. As you saw on the Twitter, and as mentioned on the past couple weeks ago edition of WrestleNomics Radio, and by the way, this is this segue of plugging. Yes, WrestleNomics Radio has a $5 Patreon that if you could contribute to, that would be nice because Chris Harrington and Brendan Howard Thurston do a podcast on the economics of professional wrestling. I currently, at this point, cannot contribute to the $5 Patreon, and nor am I looking for any kind of handout or anything like that. I just like looking at the free shows that are available, which are happily supplied by the WrestleNomics Patreons, because they supply for the premium and they also help out with the free shows. so that they could be able to do 2 shows a week, on covering a variety of topics in the financial worlds of WWE, New Japan, TNA, Ring of Honor, all sorts of different financial goodness. It's not a typical wrestling podcast, it is a financial podcast. And for both non-wrestling fans and wrestling fans, if you want to get a really good education in the field of economics, then you go listen to WrestleNomics Radio. I'll trust me, it is an incredibly fun podcast. I've listened to it for the past year, and it is an enjoyable show to listen to. Hear two intellectuals talk about their passion for the wrestling industry in this field of economics. And so, yeah, they have a Patreon. They also have a free show available if you want to check it out. And there you go. And, well, as mentioned on the WrestleNomics a couple weeks ago, well, I got a patron saint shirt sitting in the back over here where my shirts are folded. Yeah, I picked up a patron saints of pro wrestling shirt at the end of the show. I waited a couple minutes. I said hi to a lot of the wrestlers. My mother got a bunch of autographs from wrestlers. She's going to be sending them down to a friend of hers eventually. We just need to get some packing and shipping materials taken care of. But yeah, her and her kids are going to have such a fun experience when they open a package and see wrestling autographs from local regional wrestlers. And thank you once again, folks, for signing those autographs. It's I like doing special things for people, especially for my mom likes introducing, oh, these are the people who do these wrestling things, and it's like they're doing theater, they're doing the arts, and Brandon has been on my list for a long time to get a T-shirt from. And Brandon comes out all. It's like, you got merch, and it's funny story. As I actually asked him, are you going to be selling merch at the show? He said, yeah, me and a couple other people are going to be selling merch. I'm like, okay. I'm not sure if he necessarily believed that I was going to be buying merch from him, but but as if anybody's ever noticed anything about me is that I'm honest, and honesty in professional wrestling is not something that's particularly common. And it was like, no, really, I'm gonna buy a shirt for you. And so he comes down with an extra large T-shirt and large T-shirt because he wasn't sure exactly what it was. We had a little talk about Emperor Barros and his bingo cards, and Harold Menji, the new Lord and Emperor of New Japan Pro Wrestling. And I went on my merry way with two shirts in hand because I love supporting local professional wrestling, local regional professional wrestling. When you guys and gals are doing good things, it's a massive positive. It's a massive positive for, not just your area of professional wrestling, but for all of professional wrestling, really. Because right now we're kind of in this state of, oh, the indies are doing this, that, or the other thing that's caused everything to go into flames, or whether it be bad management or wrestlers not doing, the things that they should be doing to help bolster the territory, or not getting involved with the community, or just going completely insane and doing so many self-destructive things in their territory that nobody else can come through and make a living at professional wrestling, along with the other stuff that they do in their real life and their jobs. And I see that 20 as a donation. $20 is so important to a wrestler when they sell merch, because that means get a nice bite to eat, get a meal, something to drink. It's gas money for your return trip. It's a food purchase at the supermarket. It's something just a little extra. And every time that I get an independent, and I've noticed something, and this is like something that is unintentional, but since WWE Shop raised their T-shirt prices by about $4 to $27, which now makes it about $32 for me to buy a T-shirt, I've started buying a lot more independent wrestler shirts. In fact, since 2017, I've bought nothing but independent wrestler shirts. At each show I go to, at the Gold Rush show, from Gold Rush 2017 on. I bought independent wrestler shirts. I've got a stack of independent wrestler shirts, and it's so cool that I get to add Mike Skyros' shirt and Brandon Thurston's shirt to my ever-growing list of independent wrestler shirts. But that was STW Fight Night Volume 1. It had a real Fight Night atmosphere to it. And unlike most instances where you talk about Fight Club, I'm perfectly fine and dandy with talking about Fight Club in this particular instance. Sure, you could probably send a couple of goons after me, but that wouldn't make much of a difference. And it was a very enjoyable show. The matches were very solid, and it was just such a fun show to go to. Both me and my mom had a very enjoyable experience at the show, watching these thespians perform their craft in this theater, in this ye old converted church theater that was a former Underground Railroad safe house. Some minor issues here and there, but nothing too serious and nothing that can't be fixed up at the next, because they're planning on making this a more permanent venue. So it's going to be really interesting going forward to see what they do with their fall schedule. But next show for Sovereignty Wrestling is the Chautauqua County Fair Show on July, I believe it is 18th. On the 18th of July. And it's going to be really, really interesting to see. Once again, weather permitting, I think that they might have an indoor venue at the show. I'm not sure. Double check on that. But yeah, the Chautauqua County Fair Show is July 18th. If I'm wrong on the date, I will post a correction in the comments below. But it's going to be a kind of a fun time. People who've never seen professional wrestling before, Sovereignty Wrestling, as well as the Buffalo area, Western New York region, is going to provide you with a lot of surprises. Because this area has got a lot of really good talent. And no, I'm not sleeping on you guys and gals. But I feel like steady, consistent progress is the way to go when it comes to independent wrestling, because you never know. Because if you aim for the highest of the highs, then the lowest of the lows are going to hit you hard. That's just how I feel about that from my perspective, from past experiences in my life, at least. So this has been Night of the Fighting Phantom at the Theater, Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling, episode 43. I hope that you folks have had a really good time looking at, once again, yet another independent wrestling show that I've got to cover at this one. For those of you who are about to watch this show or are going to watch this show, thank you so much for watching this edition of Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling and the last episode before that, the Summer of the Donner Parties of Pro Wrestling, which is both a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reference and a reference to the novel Summer of the Monkeys. But I wanted to cover the positives of independent wrestling on this edition of the show because, as I said beforehand at the start of the show, I covered a lot of the negative last episode. Next up is episode 44, which is looking like yet another medley show for me to do. Might be focusing on WWE this time around, as to what they're doing with their cards or what's going on with our hero, Bobby Lashley, or the beloved Roman Reigns. But until then, and as my voice is starting to throw out slightly because I'm once again doing another solo podcast, this has been William Fizzpatrick. You can follow me on Twitter at Fizzpatrick14. And I thank you once again for tuning in on this edition of the show. Have a good day or night, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see you next time for the next edition of Wacky World of Wrestling, which will either be at the end of this week or start of next week. Have a good day, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you then. Happy 4th of July to all, by the way. And we hope you have a nice, happy, and safe 4th of July weekend. Have a good day. Bye.